It started like any other roadside stop, flashing lights cutting through the dark, a drunk driver trying to talk his way out, and a restless passenger who didn't know when to stay quiet. But in a single moment, patience gave way to chaos. Words turned into resistance, calm turned into violence, and before dawn, lives were changed forever. On one side stood an officer, tired of excuses but bound by duty. On the other, two people whose choices would spiral into a storm of fear, regret, and confrontation. By the time the sun rose, one would walk free, one would fall, and the thin line between justice and judgment would blur beyond recognition. The night was calm, and the highway shimmered faintly under the orange glow of streetlights. A police cruiser idled on the shoulder, its dashboard camera quietly recording the empty stretch of road. Officer Daniels sat inside, sipping lukewarm coffee, his eyes scanning the lane ahead. It had been a slow shift so far, the kind of quiet that always felt like the calm before a storm. Then, from the distance, headlights appeared, wobbling slightly from side to side. Within seconds, the car swerved halfway out of its lane, corrected, then drifted again. Daniels narrowed his eyes. It wasn't just a careless driver. It was the kind of erratic motion that screamed one thing, flipping on his lights. He pulled out and followed the vehicle. The driver didn't immediately stop. He hesitated for a few moments, rolling forward slowly before finally pulling over onto the gravel shoulder. The patrol lights cast the scene in flashes of blue and red. Daniels approached carefully, one hand resting near his holster, his flashlight cutting across the dark interior of the car. Inside were several passengers, young, loud, and visibly uneasy. The driver, a man in his late 20s, kept his eyes straight ahead, gripping the wheel tightly. "Evening," the officer began, keeping his voice steady but firm. "You've been drinking tonight." The driver hesitated, then replied, "I only had one shot, sir, just one. I'm heading straight home." Daniels leaned slightly closer. The sharp, unmistakable scent of alcohol hit his nose. "Only one shot, huh?" he repeated. "Because I can smell the alcohol on you from here. And your driving pattern, swerving between lanes, touching the fog line, that's not something I can ignore." The driver nodded, trying to appear calm. "I understand, officer, but I promise, I'm okay." "Maybe," Daniels said, stepping back. "But I need to make sure. Step out of the vehicle for me." The man obeyed, opening the door carefully and stepping onto the gravel. The night air was cold, and the tension was heavy. Behind him, the passengers murmured nervously. One woman, seated behind the driver, leaned out of the window slightly. "He's fine," she called out. "He's not drunk." Daniels raised his hand without looking at her. "Ma'am, please stay inside the vehicle," he said sharply. "I'll deal with you in a minute." He turned back to the driver. "All right, we're going to do a few tests." "Okay. Standard field sobriety exercises. I just want to make sure you're safe to drive." "Yes, sir," the man said, standing stiffly. Daniels took out his pen light. "I want you to look at the tip of this pen and follow it with your eyes. Don't move your head, just your eyes." The test began. Daniels moved the pen slowly from side to side. The driver's eyes wavered, following unevenly. Daniels frowned slightly but said nothing. Then, once again, the female passenger spoke. "Why are you bothering him with this?" He said, "He's fine." Daniels lowered the pen. "Ma'am," he said firmly, turning toward her, "I'm asking you to stop interjecting. You're distracting me and the driver. If you keep it up, you can go to jail for obstruction, do you understand?" Her voice came back sharp and indignant. "I'm just saying you don't have to be rude. We know our rights." Daniels sighed through his nose. It was the kind of interference that turned a simple stop into a confrontation. "All right," he muttered, turning back to the driver. "Let's continue." He began explaining the next test, the walk and turn. "You're going to walk heel to toe along that line, 9 steps down, pivot, and walk 9 back. Keep your arms at your sides. Do not start until I tell you." The driver nodded nervously. But before he could take a step, the woman's voice pierced the night again. "What's your badge number, officer?" Daniels froze. Slowly he turned to face her. His patience was visibly wearing thin. "Ma'am," he said, his tone now colder. "I've already warned you once. This is your final warning or what?" She shot back. "You're gonna arrest me for asking a question." Daniels exhaled sharply. "You're taking my attention off what I'm doing. You're interfering with an investigation. That's obstruction." Inside the car, the other passengers shifted uncomfortably. The tension grew thicker. Daniels took a step forward. "Ma'am, I said that's enough." But she didn't stop. She muttered under her breath, louder now, calling the situation ridiculous. Daniels finally snapped. "All right," he said, unclipping his cuffs. "Step out of the vehicle. You're done." The other passengers gasped. "What?" "She didn't do anything," one protested. Daniels ignored them. "Step out," he repeated, voice rising. Now the woman hesitated, crossing her arms. "This is harassment," she said. "You can't." "Yes, I can," Daniels interrupted. "Step out before I pull you out." The driver, caught in the middle, looked helpless. "Officer, please, you didn't mean anything by it." "I told her to stop," Daniels said. "She didn't. Now she's coming with me." He reached for her arm. She jerked back. "Don't touch me. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. You're being aggressive," she shouted. I'm not being aggressive, Daniels said evenly. You're under arrest for obstruction, hands behind your back. Now, for a few tense seconds, she resisted, demanding to know why she was being treated like a criminal. The officer repeated his command until, finally, he restrained her. The other passengers sat silently, eyes wide, as the situation de-escalated into quiet compliance. The cuffs clicked, the woman protested weakly, and Daniels led her toward his patrol car. The night air settled again. The flashing lights reflected off the side of the Battymobile, painting everything in shades of blue and red. Daniels turned back to the driver, who stood frozen beside the road, his breath visible in the cold. All right, he said, calmer now. Let's finish this. The driver nodded, subdued and respectful. Yes, sir. Daniels glanced toward the patrol car where the woman was still arguing faintly through the window. Let this be a lesson, he muttered. I don't need a crowd to do my job. The scene ended in uneasy quiet, a mix of adrenaline, authority, and restraint. For the officer, it was just another night on duty. For everyone else, it was a reminder of how quickly a single bad decision, or a few misplaced words could turn a routine stop into chaos. The night air buzzed faintly with tension as Officer Daniels adjusted the radio on his shoulder. Behind him, the woman he'd just arrested sat fuming in the back of his cruiser, the flashing lights of his patrol car washing over her angry face. Her muffled voice spilled through the half-open window, complaints, accusations, half-formed sentences about her rights. But Daniels didn't respond. He'd heard it all before. His focus stayed on the driver standing in front of him, the man's breath visible in the cold air, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Okay, Daniels said, pulling a small flashlight from his belt. Let's finish what we started. Yes, sir, the driver replied softly, trying to keep his composure. He was nervous but clearly doing his best to cooperate. The interruption earlier had rattled him, and now the silence between them felt heavy. Stand with your feet together, Daniels instructed, and keep your arms at your sides. When I tell you to begin, you're going to close your eyes and touch your finger to the tip of your nose, alternating each hand. The driver nodded. Okay, Daniels continued. And before you ask, yes, this test is recorded. Everything I do is on camera, so just listen and follow the directions carefully. The driver smiled faintly, a nervous twitch more than anything. Yes, officer, I understand. For a moment the only sound was the soft hum of the patrol car and the wind scraping across the asphalt. Daniels called out instructions, his tone even, professional. The man lifted his arm, moved slowly, and touched his nose as directed. His balance was decent, but there was hesitation, the kind of small delay that trained officers immediately recognized. Daniels made notes under his breath. Left hand, right hand, balance steady, eyes closed. Then, after a few more repetitions, he told the man to stop. Not bad, he said quietly, but not perfect either. The driver exhaled, his breath shaky. I told you, sir, I only had one shot. Daniels gave a short nod, still scanning the man's eyes. Maybe so, but your coordination's a little off, and your speech it's slower than it should be. You see where I'm going with this? The man nodded reluctantly. Yes, sir. Behind them, another car passed on the road, the gust of air breaking the silence. Inside the patrol car, the female passenger was still muttering to herself, her voice muffled but sharp. Daniels caught a few words: aggressive, unfair, abuse of power. He clenched his jaw slightly. He turned to the driver. Hang tight a second. All right. He stepped toward his cruiser and leaned into the window. Ma'am, he said, his voice raised just enough to cut through the glass. I told you to stay quiet. I've got a driver I'm testing, and you're distracting both of us. Do you understand me? The woman glared at him. What's your badge number? She snapped. Daniels straightened slowly, eyes hard. I said, I'm about done with you. I have the right to ask. You're done, he cut in, his patience gone. Step out. When she refused, Daniels opened the back door himself. The cold air hit her face, and her tone shifted instantly from defiance to fear. Wait, why are you? You're under arrest for obstruction, he said, his voice clipped, professional, practiced. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. She hesitated, frozen between anger and disbelief. The other passengers began to protest, pleading with the officer to calm down. One of them shouted, She's just talking. She didn't do anything, but Daniels didn't flinch. I told her 3 times, he said flatly. This isn't a debate. The woman's voice rose again, shrill now. Why are you being so aggressive? I just asked a question. I'm not being aggressive, Daniels said. You're under arrest for obstruction. Hands behind your back. When she didn't comply, he reached gently but firmly for her wrist. She jerked back violently. Don't touch me. Turn around, he repeated. His tone shifted, still measured, but heavy with authority. Turn around and put your hands behind your back now. She twisted again, yelling something incoherent. For a brief, chaotic moment, her movement caught the edge of the door, and Daniels moved quickly, restraining her arms. The handcuffs clicked shut, echoing in the cool night air. You're under arrest, he repeated, keeping his tone steady. For obstruction. She tried to pull free, shaking her head. This is crazy. You can't arrest me for talking. You can when it interferes with a lawful investigation, he said simply. You're done. As he guided her toward the cruiser, the driver stood motionless near the hood of his car, visibly uncomfortable. Officer, he said carefully, I'm sorry about her. She didn't mean anything by it. She just gets. Daniels held up a hand. Don't worry about it. This isn't on you. He opened the back door of his cruiser and motioned for her to sit down. Watch her head. She glared at him but obeyed, muttering under her breath. The door shut with a dull thud. Daniels exhaled slowly and turned back toward the driver. All right, he said, his tone softening again. Let's wrap this up. The driver nodded, his voice low. Yes, sir. Daniels retrieved his flashlight and notepad, finishing his observations. You've been cooperative, he said after a moment. That's the only reason I am still talking to you instead of writing you up. The driver swallowed hard. I understand I'm not saying you're drunk, Daniels continued, but I can't ignore the signs I saw. I'm going to cut you a break this time, but if I ever see you driving like that again, I won't hesitate. The driver nodded again. You won't, sir. I promise. Daniels studied him for a long moment, then gave a single nod. All right, you can go. Get someone to drive you home, or park this thing and call a ride. I don't want to see it on the road tonight. The drive to the station was silent, except for the low hum of the engine and the soft crackle of the radio. The woman sat in the back seat, her hands cuffed in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. Every now and then she glanced at the steel mesh divider, watching the back of Officer Daniels' head as if searching for some trace of understanding or mercy. But he didn't speak. His attention was on the road, his expression unreadable. Red and blue lights flickered across the dashboard, bouncing faintly on the windshield as they passed empty intersections. The streets were nearly deserted, only the occasional car whispering past in the opposite lane. Headlights slicing through the darkness. The town at night always carried a stillness that could feel either peaceful or haunting, depending on who you were sitting beside. Inside the cruiser, the air was thick with unspoken frustration. Daniels finally broke the silence. You could have just kept quiet, he said evenly, eyes still forward. That's all you had to do. The woman shifted slightly in her seat, her voice sharp but trembling. You're acting like I committed a crime. I just asked a question. He didn't turn around. You interfered in an investigation. That's not just a question, that's obstruction. She laughed bitterly. Oh, come on. You think that'll hold up? You just didn't like what I said. Daniels' jaw tightened. You were told 3 times to stay quiet. You kept talking. That's all it takes. Unbelievable, she muttered, shaking her head. You guys just make up rules as you go, don't you? Daniels didn't respond. He'd been on the job long enough to know when arguing was pointless. The radio crackled again, a dispatcher's voice reporting a separate traffic stop across town. He acknowledged it with a quick 10 to 4 and turned onto the main road toward the precinct. As the cruiser passed under the glow of a yellow streetlight, the woman's reflection flickered in the glass. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with exhaustion. You ever think maybe people don't trust cops because of stuff like this? She asked suddenly. Daniels sighed quietly. Every day, he said. And every day, I still have to do my job. For a moment, the car was quiet again. Then she spoke more softly, almost as if to herself. You're ruining my life over nothing. Daniels' voice dropped, low and calm. No, you're the one who made this a problem. You made choices. I just responded to them. They drove the next few miles in silence. The city lights grew brighter, flickering across the windshield as they neared the precinct. Daniels could see the reflection of her face, tight with anger, but lined with something else too. Regret, maybe, or disbelief. When they pulled into the back lot of the station, Daniels parked the cruiser near the booking entrance. He turned off the engine and stepped out. The night air cooled against his face. He opened the back door, leaning slightly so his tone stayed level. Step out, ma'am. She hesitated. Can I please make a phone call? You'll get that chance once we're inside, he said, reluctantly. She slid out of the car. The sound of the cuffs clinking as she moved filled the empty lot. Daniels guided her toward the door, one hand loosely on her arm. The heavy metal door buzzed open after he swiped his ID card, revealing a narrow hallway lined with gray tiles and fluorescent lights. The moment they entered, the warmth of the building hit, stale coffee, disinfectant, and paperwork in the air. The night desk sergeant, a heavy-set man named Torres, looked up from his computer. Another one, he said with a tired grin. Obstruction, Daniels replied. Refused commands. Interfered during a sobriety test. Torres nodded, typing something into the system. Name. Daniels turned to the woman. Tell him your name, please. She hesitated again, glaring at both men. Jessica, she muttered finally. Jessica Morales Torres entered the name. All right. Jessica Morales, let's get you processed. Daniels stood off to the side as Torres began the booking procedure. Fingerprints, photos, basic intake questions. Jessica answered each one reluctantly, sometimes refusing until Daniels reminded her of her rights and the consequences of non-compliance at one point. As Torres rolled her fingers on the scanner, she whispered under her breath, You guys love this part, don't you? Making people feel small. Torres gave her a weary look. Trust me, ma'am, I'd rather be home right now. When the paperwork was done, Torres motioned to a holding bench. Have a seat while we finish the file. Jessica sat down hard, exhaling through her nose. Daniels leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching silently. He didn't enjoy this part. It was routine, mechanical, but it always left a bitter taste. After a moment, she looked up at him. You got family, officer. He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, then you should know what this feels like, she said quietly. How wrong it is. Daniels met her gaze. It's not about right or wrong right now. It's about what happened. And what happens next is up to you. She looked away, eyes glassy. What happens next, huh? I go to court, pay a fine, lose my job, and you just move on. Daniels didn't answer. The truth was, he didn't have a good answer. Torres came over with a clipboard. All right, paperwork's set. She'll be here overnight until arraignment in the morning. Daniels nodded. Got it. Jessica stood as Torres unlocked the bench cuff. Can I make that phone call now? She asked. Torres pointed to the payphone on the wall. One call, make it count. The morning light came slowly, stretching across the horizon in dull bands of gray and orange. Officer Daniels sat in his kitchen, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling on the table beside him. His uniform jacket hung over the back of the chair, his badge resting on the counter. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the stove. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the night before the traffic stop, the shouting, the handcuffs clicking shut. It wasn't the first time something like that had played out, but something about this one stayed with him. Maybe it was the way the woman's voice cracked when she asked if he regretted it. Maybe it was how empty the road felt afterward. The coffee tasted bitter as he took another sip. His phone buzzed on the table, a text from dispatch. Court appearance scheduled 9 a.m. Morels, Jessica, your presence required. He sighed, rubbing his temples. It was barely 6 a.m. That gave him a few hours to pull himself together and pretend like he hadn't been thinking about it all night. Outside, the city was waking up. The sound of distant traffic filtered in through the window. A jogger passed by on the sidewalk, a dog barking faintly in the distance. The world moved on, indifferent. Daniels stood, pushed the mug aside, and went to get ready. By 8:15, he was back in uniform, the same professional mask fixed over his face. He drove to the courthouse, parking in the rear lot reserved for law enforcement. Inside, the air was different, colder, heavier. People lined the hallways, defendants, attorneys, bailiffs, all caught in the slow machinery of the justice system. He checked in at the clerk's desk, gave his name, and waited. After a few minutes, the clerk nodded. You'll be called when it's your turn, Officer Daniels. He nodded back and took a seat on the wooden bench near the wall. A few feet away, Jessica Morales sat with her public defender, her wrists free now, but her posture tense. She looked different in daylight, tired, smaller somehow. The stubborn defiance from last night had faded, replaced with quiet anxiety. She didn't look at him at first, but when she finally did, their eyes met for a brief second. Neither of them said anything. The courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff called her name. Case number 2025-184. State versus Jessica Morales. She stood slowly, walked past Daniels without a word, and entered the courtroom with her attorney. Daniels followed behind, taking his place at the witness stand. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and silver hair tied in a bun, adjusted her glasses and looked over the file. Ms. Morales, you've been charged with obstruction of justice, she began. Officer, you were the arresting party. Yes, Your Honor, Daniels said, standing straight. The defense attorney, a young man barely in his 30s, spoke first. Your Honor, my client fully cooperated once she understood the officer's intent. She didn't physically interfere, didn't resist, and there was no escalation beyond verbal disagreement. We're asking for leniency, dismissal, or community service at most. The judge looked at Daniels. Officer, do you believe her actions justified the arrest? Daniels hesitated for the first time that morning. The courtroom was quiet, every eye on him. He remembered her shouting, the frustration, the repeated commands, but he also remembered the fear in her voice when the cuffs closed, and the way she'd said, "You're ruining my life over nothing." He cleared his throat. Your Honor, he began, his voice low but steady. At the time, yes, she ignored multiple lawful commands and disrupted a field sobriety test. My decision was based on protocol, but the judge prompted gently. Daniels took a slow breath, but in hindsight, she didn't pose a threat. The situation could have been handled differently. The defense attorney's eyes flickered with surprise. Jessica looked up sharply, studying his face. The judge nodded, scribbling something in her notes. Thank you, officer. She turned to Jessica. Ms. Morales, your behavior was inappropriate, and I expect you understand the seriousness of disregarding police orders. However, given the officer's statement and lack of prior offenses, I'm dismissing the charge with a warning. Jessica's shoulders dropped in visible relief. Thank you, Your Honor, her lawyer said quickly. The gavel struck once, the sound sharp in the still room. Case dismissed. As the crowd began to move, Daniels stepped back, his expression unreadable. Jessica gathered her things and hesitated near the door. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she finally said, "You didn't have to do that." He met her eyes. "Yeah, I did." They stood there for a beat, surrounded by murmuring voices and shuffling papers. Then she nodded once, not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement, and turned to leave. Outside the courthouse steps were bright under the late morning sun. People moved past in every direction, each caught in their own small battles. Daniels walked down slowly, feeling the weight of his badge against his chest. For the first time in months it felt heavier than usual. At the bottom of the steps, Jessica stood waiting. She looked uncertain, holding her phone in both hands. "I called my brother," she said quietly when he approached. "He's coming to pick me up." Daniels nodded. "Good." There was a brief silence before she added, "I shouldn't have yelled at you. You were just doing your job." He gave a faint, tired smile. "And I shouldn't have lost my patience. Happens more than it should." She exhaled slowly, glancing at the parking lot. "Guess we both had a night we won't forget." "Yeah," he said. "That's one way to put it." She got into the car, and as it drove away, Daniels watched until the taillights disappeared into traffic.